Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our buddy read of Mr. Scarborough's Family. This is actually a read aloud where I'm reading you the book. And we are up to chapter 21, having just had a crucial matter settled in chapter 20, where the lawyer, Mr. Gray, one of our main characters, went down to Tretton Park, the estate of Mr. Scarborough, who is old and sick and dying. He was there in the company of Mr. Scarborough's son, Augustus, and Augustus Scarborough's hanger-on friend, Septimus Jones, to talk about what could be done about the huge amounts of debts raised against the property by Montjoy Scarborough, who until just recently was the acknowledged heir of Tretton Park. Not anymore. Mr. Scarborough has produced documentation that proves he is illegitimate. So Augustus Scarborough is now the heir and wants to settle with all the moneylenders so that they're not constantly hounding him when he comes into his own, which he would like to happen sooner rather than later. And we had those scenes, and they were uncomfortable. And now everybody has Mr. Gray has gone back to his home. And at chapter 21, we get a little bit more of what is going to please all of you Mr. Scarborough fans out there. Quite a few Mr. Scarborough fans who are listening along with this book. I'm a fan of his as well, scapegrace though he may be. And we get a whole chapter about him now. So that's what this one is. Mr. Scarborough's thoughts of himself. When Mr. Scarborough was left alone, he did not go to sleep, as he pretended, but lay there for an hour, thinking of his position and indulging to the full the feelings of anger which he now entertained toward his second son. He had never, in truth, loved Augustus. Augustus was very like his father in his capacity for organizing deceit, for plotting, and so contriving that his own will should be in opposition to the wills of all those around him. But they were thoroughly unlike in the object to be attained. Mr. Scarborough was not a selfish man. Augustus was selfish and nothing else. Mr. Scarborough hated the law, because it was the law, and endeavored to put a restraint upon him and others. Augustus liked the law, unless when in particular points it interfered with his own actions. Mr. Scarborough thought that he could do better than the law. Augustus wished to do worse. Mr. Scarborough never blushed at what he himself attempted unless he failed, which was not often the case. But he was constantly driven to blush for his son. Augustus blushed for nobody and for nothing. When Mr. Scarborough had declared to the attorney that just praise was due to Augustus for the nobility of the sacrifice he was making, Augustus had understood his father accurately and determined to be revenged, not because of the expression of his father's thoughts, but because he had expressed himself before the attorney. Mr. Scarborough also thought that he was entitled to his revenge. When he had been left alone for an hour, he rang the bell, which was close to his side, and called for Mr. Merton, who is attending on him. "Where is Mr. Gray?" "I think he has ordered the wagonette to take him to the station." "And where is Augustus?" "I do not know." "And Mr. Jones? I suppose they have not gone to the station. Just feel my pulse, Merton. I am afraid I am very weak." Mr. Merton felt his pulse and shook his head. "There isn't a pulse, so to speak." "Oh, yes, but it is irregular. If you will exert yourself so violently." "That is all very well, but a man has to exert himself sometimes, let the penalty be what it may. When do you think that Sir William will have to come again?" Sir William, when he came, would come with his knife, and his advent was always to be feared. Sir William is Mr. Merton's employer. He is a big-shot London doctor. And when he comes with a surgical case to cut up Mr. Scarborough, who's already been through at least one horrifying operation of that kind. "It depends very much on yourself." This is Merton speaking. "Mr. Scarborough, I don't think he can come very often, but you may take the distances long or short. You should attend to no business." "That is absolute rubbish." "Nevertheless, it is my duty to say so. Whatever arrangements may be required, they should be made by others. Of course, if you do as you have done this morning, I can suggest some very little relief. I can give you some tonics and increase the amount, but I cannot resist the evil which you yourself do to yourself." "I understand all about it." "You will kill yourself if you go on." "I don't mean to go on any farther, not as I have done today. But as to giving up my business, that is rubbish. I've got my property to manage, and I mean to manage it myself as long as I live. Unfortunately, there have been accidents which make the management a little rough at times. I have had one of the rough moments today, but they shall not be repeated. I give you my word on that. But do not talk to me about giving up my business. Now, I'll take your tonics, and then would you have the kindness to ask my sister to come to me?" His sister takes care of him as well. Miss Scarborough, who was always on the waiting on her brother, was at once in the room. "Martha," he said, "where is Augustus?" "I think he has gone out." "And where is Mr. Septimus Jones?" "He is with him, John. The two are always together." "You would not mind giving my compliments to Mr. Jones and telling him that his bedroom is wanted?" "His bedroom wanted? There are lots of bedrooms and nobody to occupy them." "It's a hint that I want him to go. He'll understand that." You'll notice that that was the standard form. If you want a particular guest under your house to go, the courteous form was to say, "We need your room." Even Plantagenet Palliser does that at Omnium Gatherum, which has probably 100 rooms. That's just the way that you phrase it. "Would it not be better to tell Augustus?" asked the lady, doubting very much her power to carry out the instructions given to her. "He would tell Augustus. It is not, you see, any objection I have to Mr. Jones. I have not had the pleasure of his acquaintance. He is a most agreeable young man, I'm sure, but I do not care to entertain an agreeable young man without having a word to say on the subject. Augustus doesn't think it worth his while even to speak to me about him. Of course, when I am gone, in a month or so, perhaps a week or two, he can do as he pleases." "Oh, don't, John." "But it is so. While I live, I am master, at least of this house. I cannot see Mr. Jones, and I do not wish to have another quarrel with Augustus. Mr. Merton says every time I get angry it gives Sir William another chance with his knife. I thought that perhaps you could do it." Then Miss Scarborough promised that she would do it, and having her brother's health very much at heart, she did it. Augustus stood smiling while the message was in fact conveyed to him. So she doesn't do it. She can't bring herself to talk to Mr. Jones. She talks to Augustus instead. When the lady had gone, he bobbed his head to signify that he acknowledged the receipt of it. "I have got my walking papers," he said to Septimus Jones 10 minutes afterwards. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you? Then you must be very thick-headed. My father has sent me word that you are to be turned out. Of course he means it for me. He does not wish to give me the power of saying that he has sent me away from his house, me whom he has so long endeavored to rob, me to whom he owes so much for taking no steps to punish his fraud. And he knows that I can take none because he is on his deathbed. Little word to you, you little worm. You couldn't do anything to him anyway. Deathbed or no deathbed. But you couldn't, could you? If you were, were he anywhere else? Couldn't I? That's all you know about it. Understand, however, that I shall start tomorrow morning, and unless you like to remain here on a visit to him, you had better go with me." Mr. Jones signified his compliance with the hint, and so Miss Scarborough had done her work. Mr. Scarborough, when thus left alone, spent his time chiefly in thinking on the condition of his sons. His eldest son, Montjoy, who had ever been his favorite, whom as a little boy he had spoilt by every means in his power, was a ruined man. His debts had all been paid, except the money due to the moneylenders, but he was not the less a ruined man. Where he was at this moment his father did not know. All the world knew the injustice of which he had been guilty on his boy's behalf, and all the world knew the failure of that endeavor. And now he had made a great and successful effort to give back his legitimate heir all his property. But in return, the second son only desired his death, and almost told him so to his face. He had been proud of Augustus as a lad, but he had never loved him as he had loved Montjoy. Now he knew that he and Augustus must henceforth be absolutely enemies. Never for a moment did he think of giving up his power over the estate, as long as the estate should be still his, though it should be but for a month, though it should be but for a week, he would hold his own. Such was the nature of the man, and when he swallowed Mr. Merton's tonics, he did so more with the idea of keeping the property out of his son's hands than of preserving his own life. According to his view, he had done much for Augustus, and this was the return he received. This is how they thank me. Notice, though, despite all that he's done, all this huge scandal, all this pile of secret papers handed to his lawyer, proving that Augustus Scarborough is his heir and will inherit Tretton Park, here he's extending the very last ampules of his life energy to keep the property out of Augustus's hands. And in truth, he had done much for Augustus. For years past, it had been his object to leave his second son as much as he could, as would come to his first. He had continued to put money by him instead of spending his income on himself. Of this Mr. Gray had known much, but had said nothing, when he was speaking these severe words which Mr. Scarborough had always contrived to receive with laughter. But he had felt their injustice, though he had himself ridiculed the law. There had been 2 sons, both born from the same mother, and he had willed that they should be both rich men, living among the foremost of their fellow men, and the circumstances of the property would have helped him. The income from year to year went on increasing. The water mills at Tretton and the town of Tretton had grown and been expanded within his domain, and the management of the sales in Mr. Gray's hands had been judicious. The revenues were double that which they had been when Mr. Scarborough first inherited it. It was all, no doubt, entailed, but for 20 years he had enjoyed the power of accumulating a sum of money for his second son's sake, or would have enjoyed it, had not the accumulation been taken from him to pay Mountjoy's debts. It was in vain that he attempted to make Mountjoy responsible for the money. Mountjoy's debts and irregularities and gaming went on, till Mr. Scarborough found himself bound to dethrone his illegitimate son and place the legitimate in his proper position. In doing the deed he had not suffered much, though the circumstances which had led to the doing of it had been full of pain. There had been an actual pleasure to him in thus showing himself to be superior to the conventionalities of the world. There was Augustus still ready to occupy the position to which he had in truth been born, and at the moment Mountjoy was gone, he knew not where, though there had been gambling debts which, coming as they did after many others, he had refused to pay. He himself was dying at the moment, as he thought. It would be better for him to take up with Augustus. Mountjoy he must leave to his fate. For such a son, so reckless, so incurable, so hopeless, it was impossible that anything further should be done. He would at least enjoy the power of leaving those wretched creditors without their money. There should be some triumph, some consolation in that. So he had done, and now his heir turned against him. Mr. Scarborough is learning a lot about Augustus Scarborough in this interval. I doubt that he had, despite his protestations, I doubt that he had as negative an opinion of Augustus Scarborough before he saw his son so nakedly want his father to die as he has now. But one thing he's absolutely right about: when you are in Mountjoy Scarborough's position, when you are just a gambling addict who has abandoned himself to the addiction, you are hopeless. You might, in the modern day, with modern facilities and modern understanding of gambling as a chemical addiction, you might maybe be saved if the whole world was sitting on your chest. But in this circumstance, no, it'll never happen. It was very bitter to him as he lay thinking of it all. He was a man who was, from his constitution and heart, capable of making great sacrifices for those he loved. He had a most thorough contempt for the character of an honest man. He did not believe in honesty, but only in mock honesty. And yet he would speak of an honest man with admiration, meaning something altogether different from the honesty with which men ordinarily spoke. The usual honesty of the world was for him all pretense, or if not, assumed for the sake of a character it would achieve. Mr. Gray he knew to be honest. Mr. Gray's word he knew to be true, but he fancied that Mr. Gray had adopted this absurd mode of living with a view of cheating his neighbors by appearing to be better than others. We know this isn't true. Mr. Gray is actually better than others. He is actually honest. This is just pure cynicism on Mr. Scarborough's part. All virtue and all vice were comprised by him in the words good nature and ill nature. All church-going propensities, and these propensities in his estimate extended very widely, he scorned from the very bottom of his heart. That one set of words should be deemed more wicked than another, as in regards to swearing, was to him a sign of either hypocrisy or idolatry, or of feminine weakness of intellect. About to get a little disquisition on feminine weakness. It's up to you whether you impart this to Mr. Scarborough or to Anthony Trollope. To women he allowed the privilege of being, in regard of thought, only something better than dogs. When his sister Martha shuddered at some exclamation from his mouth, he would say to himself simply that she was a woman, not an idiot or a hypocrite. Of women, old and young, he had been very fond, and in his manner to them very tender. But when a woman rose to a way of thinking akin to his own, she was no longer a woman to his senses. Against such a one his tastes revolted. She sank to the level of a man contaminated by petticoats. And law was hardly less absurd to him than religion. It consisted of a perplexed entanglement of rules got together so that a few might live in comfort at the expense of many. Robbery, if you could get to the bottom of it, was bad, as was all violence. But taxation was robbery. Rent was robbery. Prices fixed according to the desire of the seller and not in obedience to justice were robbery. Then you are the greatest of robbers, his friends would say to him. He would admit it, allowing that such a state of society he was not prepared to go out and live naked in the streets if he could help it. But he delighted to get the better of the law, and triumphed in his own iniquity, as had been seen in his conduct in reference to his sons. In this way he lived, and was kind to many people, having a generous and open hand. But he was a man who could hate with a bitter hatred, and he hated most of those suspected by him of mean or dirty conduct. Mr. Gray, who constantly told him to his face that he was a rascal, he did not hate at all. Thinking Mr. Gray to be in some respects idiotic, he respected him and almost loved him. He thoroughly believed Mr. Gray, thinking him to be an ass for telling so much truth unnecessarily, and he had loved his son Montjoy in spite of all his iniquities, and had fostered him till it was impossible to foster him any longer. Then he had endeavored to love Augustus, and did not in the least love him the less because his son told him frequently of the wicked things he had done. He did not object to be told of his wickedness even by his son, but Augustus suspected him of other things than those of which he accused him, and attempted to be sharp with him, and to get the better of him at his own game. And his son laughed at him, and scorned him, and regarded him as one who was troublesome only for a time, and who need not be treated with much attention because he was there only for a time. Therefore he hated Augustus, but Augustus was his heir, and he knew that he must die soon. For how long could he live? And what could he yet do before he died? A braver man than Mr. Scarborough never lived, that is, one who less feared to die. Whether that is true courage may be a question, but it was his, in conjunction with courage of another description. He did not fear to die, nor did he fear to live. Not to go out with with the conviction that he was vanishing amidst the glory of success was to him to be wretched at the last moment. And to be wretched at his last moment, or to anticipate that he should be so, was to him, even so near his last hours, the acme of misery. How much of life was left to him so that he might recover something of success? Or was any moment left to him? This is fascinating. This look at Mr. Scarborough. And it's also a little sobering because of how much of it depends on him being in his right mind to the last minute. We don't think about death this way these days. We think you will just diminish and diminish and diminish and diminish, and finally in your last year, your last 2 years, maybe your last 10 years, you will be a shadow of yourself. You won't command anything. I'm not saying a property like Tretton Park, but that you won't know yourself. You won't be in the blaze of your triumph, in the peak of your strength, but you'll still be alive, because we progress beyond the doctor and his knives. We can keep you alive, diminishing every day. I don't know what you think about that. I don't know exactly at times what I think about it. I always remember, it's easy to say, well, surely this, no matter how brutal it was a better way to live. It's easy to say that, but I always remember a moment at a nursing home where cake was brought out by the staff, and it had 1,000,000 candles on it, and it was brought to the shrunken, white-eyed old man who could barely raise his hand to wave at it. He certainly couldn't blow out any candles. He was a feeble, blue-veined thing. And the person across the room said to the person she was talking to, who on earth would want to be 100 years old? That's what the man was. He was getting a 100-year-old birthday cake. She said, who on earth would want to be 100 years old? And the person she was talking to immediately said, someone who's 99. But anyway, let's keep going. He could not sleep, so he rang his bell and again sent for Mr. Merton. I've taken what you told me. Probably, we don't know what's in that concoction. Laudanum? So best, said Mr. Merton, for he did not always feel assured that this strange patient would take what had been ordered. And I have tried to sleep. That will come after a while. You would not naturally sleep after the tonic. And I have been thinking of what you said about business. There's one thing I must do, and then I can remain quiet for a fortnight, unless I should be called upon to disturb my rest by dying. We will hope not. That may go as it pleases, said the sick man. I want you now to write a letter for me to Mr. Gray. Mr. Merton had undertaken to perform the duties of secretary as well as doctor, and had thought in this way to obtain some authority over his patient for his patient's own good. Good luck with that, with Mr. Scarborough. But he had found already that no authority had come to him. He now sat down at a table close to the bedside and prepared to write in accordance with Mr. Scarborough's dictation. I think that Mr. Gray, the lawyer, you know, is a good man. The world, as far as I hear it, says that he is honest. I don't care a straw what the world says. The world says that I am dishonest, but I am not. That's how he never misses an opportunity to defend himself, while saying that he doesn't care. I think it preys on his conscience. I think Trollope is meaning you to see that it preys on his conscience. Merton could only shrug his shoulders. I don't say that because I want you to change your opinion. I don't care what you think. But I tell you as a fact, I doubt whether Gray is so absolutely honest as I am. But as far as things go, he's a good man. Certainly. But the world, I suppose, says that my son Augustus is honest. Well, yes, I suppose so. If you have looked into him and have seen the contrary, I respect your intelligence. I did not mean anything particular. I dare say not. And if so, I mean nothing particular as to your intelligence. He, at any rate, is a scoundrel. Montjoy. You know Montjoy? Never saw him in my life. I don't think he is a scoundrel. Not all around. He has gambled when he has not had money to pay. That is bad. And he has promised when he wanted money and broken his word as soon as he had got it, which is bad also. And he has thought himself to be a fine fellow because he has been intimate with lords and dukes, which is very bad. He has never cared whether he paid his tailor. I do not mean that he has merely got into debt, which a young man such as he cannot help, but he has not cared whether his breeches were his or another man's. That, too, is bad. Though he has been passionately fond of women, it has only been for himself, not for the women, which is very bad. There is an immense deal to be altered before he can go to heaven. What Mr. Scarborough is describing here, we have no reason to believe it isn't accurate. What he's describing here is a worthless lout. I hope the change may come before it is too late, said Merton, who has got to be wondering what on earth is this old man saying now. These changes don't come very suddenly, you know. But there is some chance for Montjoy. I don't think there is any chance for Augustus. Here he paused, but Merton did not feel disposed to make any remark. You don't happen to know a young man by the name of Annesley, do you? Harry Annesley? I have heard his name from your son. From Augustus. Then you didn't hear any good of him, I'm sure. You have heard all the row about poor Montjoy's disappearance. I heard that he did disappear. After a quarrel with Annesley. After some quarrel, I did not notice the name at the time. Harry Annesley was the name. Now, Augustus says that Harry Annesley was the last person who saw Montjoy before his disappearance, the last who knew him. He implies thereby that Annesley was conscious or unconscious cause of his disappearance. Well, yes, certainly it is so. As it has been thought by the police and by other fools that Montjoy was murdered, that his disappearance was occasioned by his death either by murder or suicide, it follows that Annesley must have something to do with it. That is the inference, is it not? I should suppose so. That is manifestly the inference which Augustus draws. To hear him speak to me about it, you would suppose that he suspected Annesley of having killed Montjoy. Not that, I hope. Something of the sort. He is intended to be believed that Annesley, for his own purpose, has caused Montjoy to be made away with. He has endeavored to fill the police with that idea. A policeman generally is the biggest fool that London or England or the world produces, and has been selected on that account. Therefore, the police have a beautifully mysterious and altogether ignorant suspicion as to Annesley. But this is the doing of Augustus for some purpose of his own. Now, let me tell you that Augustus saw Montjoy after Annesley had seen him, and knows this to be the case, and that it was Augustus who contrived Montjoy's disappearance. So what do you think of Augustus? This was a question which Merton did not find it very easy to answer, but Mr. Scarborough waited for a reply. I had rather not give an opinion on a point so raised. You may. Of course you understand that I intend you to assert that Augustus is the greatest blackguard you have ever known. If you have anything to say in his favor, you can say it. Only that you may be mistaken. Living down here, you may not know the truth. Just that. But I do know the truth. Augustus is very clever, but there are others as clever as he is. He can pay, and then so can I. That he should want to get Montjoy out of the way is intelligible. Montjoy has become disreputable and had better be out of the way. But why persistently endeavor to throw the blame on young Annesley? That surprises me, only I do not care much about it. I hear now for the first time that he has ruined young Annesley, and this does appear to be very horrible. But why does he want to pay £80,000 to these creditors? That I should wish to do, out of the property which must be very short while become his, would be intelligible. I may be supposed to have some affection for Montjoy, and after all, am I not called upon to pay the money out of my own pocket? Do you understand it? Not in the least, said Merton, who did not indeed very much care about it. Nor do I. Only this: if he could pay these men and deprive them of all power of obtaining further payment, who would have the property, they at any rate would be quiet. Augustus is now my eldest son. Perhaps he thinks that he might not remain so. If I were out of the way and these creditors were paid, he thinks that poor Montjoy wouldn't have a chance. He shall pay this £80,000. Montjoy hasn't a chance as it is, but Augustus shall pay the penalty. Then he threw himself back on the bed, and Mr. Merton begged him to spare himself the trouble of the letter for the present. But in a few moments he was again at his elbow and took some further medicine. I am a great ass, he said, to help Augustus in playing his game. If I were to go off at once, he would be the happiest fellow alive. But come, let us begin. And he dictated a letter, as follows. Dear Mr. Gray, I have been thinking much on what has passed between us the other day. Augustus seems to be in a great hurry to pay the creditors, and I do not see why he should not be gratified, as the money may now be forthcoming. I presume the sales, which will be completed before Christmas, will nearly enable him to stop their mouth. I can understand that Montjoy should be induced to join with me and Augustus, so that in disposing of so large a sum of money, the authority of all may be given, both myself and of the heir, and also of him who a short time since was supposed to be the heir. I think that you may possibly find Montjoy's address by applying to Augustus, who is always clever in such matters. But you will have to be certain that you obtain all the bonds. If you can get Tyrwhitt to help you, that's the major creditor, you will be sure of doing so. The matter to him is one of vital importance, as his sum is so much the largest. Of course, he will open his mouth very wide, but when he finds that he can get his principal and nothing more, I think that he will help you. I am afraid that I must ask you to put yourself in correspondence with Augustus. That he is an insolent scoundrel, I will admit, but we cannot very well complete this affair without him. I fancy that he now feels it to be his interest to get all done before I die, as the men will be clamorous with their bonds as soon as the breath is out of my body. Yours sincerely, John Scarborough. So this plan is afoot, for Mr. Gray to learn exactly how much actual money, what is the principles of the loan, exactly how much money Montjoy has been lent, not interest, not anything like that, just how much cash, and pay that cash if the creditors will tear up their bonds and say that's it. Rather than get nothing, which they will get because Montjoy is not going to inherit Tretton Park, rather than get nothing, we'll take this. A staggering amount of money, let's keep in mind. And robbing a man of interest is not the same as robbing him of money. That plan is now afoot. It needs Montjoy to be involved. It needs all three Scarborough men to be involved. That will do, he said when the letter was finished, but when Mr. Merton turned to leave the room, Mr. Scarborough retained him. Upon the whole, I am not dissatisfied with my life. I don't know that you have occasion, rejoined Mr. Merton, and this he absolutely lied, for according to his thinking, there was very much in the affairs of Mr. Scarborough's life which ought to have indicated regret. He knew the whole story of the birth of the eldest son, of the subsequent marriage, and of Mr. Scarborough's fraudulent deceit, which had lasted for so many years, and of his latter return to the truth so as to save the property, and to give back to the younger son all of which so many years he, his father, had attempted to rob him. All London had talked of the affair, and all London had declared that so wicked and dishonest an old gentleman had never lived. And now he had returned to the truth simply by view of cheating the creditors, keeping the estate in the family. He was manifestly an old gentleman who ought to be above all others dissatisfied with his own life. But Mr. Merton, when the assertion was made to him, knew not what other answer to make. I really do not think that I have. I do not know one to whom heaven, with all its bliss, will be more readily accorded. What have I done for myself? I don't quite know what you have done all your life. I was born a rich man, and then I married, not rich as I am now, but with ample means for marrying. After Mr. Montjoy's birth, said Merton, who could not pretend to be ignorant of the circumstance. Well, yes, I have my own ideas about marriage and what kind of thing which are, perhaps, at variance with yours. Whereupon Merton bowed. I had the best wife in the world, who entirely coincided with me in all that I did. I lived entirely abroad and made most liberal allowances to all the agricultural tenants. I rebuilt all the cottages. Go and look at them. Let any man shoot his own game till Montjoy came up in the world and could take the shooting into his own hands. When the people at the pottery began to build, I assisted them in every way in the world. I offered to keep a school at my own expense, solely on the understanding that what they called dissenters should be allowed to come there. The parson spread about a rumor that I was an atheist, and consequently the school was kept for the dissenters only. The school board had come and made all that right, though the parson goes on with his rumor. If he understood me as well as I understand him, he would know that he is more an atheist than I am. I gave my boys the best education, spending on them more than double what is done by men with twice my means. My tastes were all simple and were not especially vicious. I do not know that I have even made anyone unhappy. Then the estate became richer, and Montjoy grew more and more expensive. I began to find that with all my economies, the estate could not keep pace with him, so as to allow me to put by anything for Augustus. Then I had to bethink myself what I had to do to save the estate from those rascals. If this CV is correct, then Mr. Scarborough has done a lot. Rebuilding cottages, letting people shoot game until his son came of age, starting a school. That's a lot. This is the first mention we've had of any of this. You took peculiar steps, said Merton. I am a man who does take peculiar steps. Another would have turned his face to the wall in my state of health and allowed two dirty Jews such as Tyrwhitt and Samuel Hart to have revelled in the wealth of Tretton. I am not going to allow them to revel. Tyrwhitt knows me, and Hart will have to know me. They could not keep their hands to themselves till the breath was out of my body. Now I am about to see that each shall have his own shortly, and the estate shall be kept in the family. For Mr. Augustus Scarborough? Yes, alas, yes. But that is not my doing. I do not know myself that I have cause to be dissatisfied with myself, but I cannot but own that I am unhappy. But I wish you to understand, as though a man may break the law, he need not therefore be accounted bad, and though he may have views of his own as to religious matters, he need not be an atheist. I have made efforts on behalf of others in which I have allowed no outward circumstance to control me. And now I think I do feel sleepy. So there you go. If that cry from the heart, if that self-justification on the part of Mr. Scarborough isn't enough for you, I don't know what would be. That is the heart and soul of the man. I would argue that there is a little self-deception going on. I think he feels the injustice that he's done to his late wife, for instance, and her memory, a lot more than he says. I think that's why he's so touchy on the subject. And also, obviously, I think he's an atheist. Obviously, I think that parson is correct. But either way, there is the man in full, who has written to his lawyer saying how you can get in touch with my other son, and that I think we should go through with this and raise this money. Even though he's not quite sure what game Augustus Scarborough is playing. Why would Augustus Scarborough want to raise this money? Anyway, that's the chapter. We will wrap this up for now, and I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.